I want to welcome people to another one of our webinars. As you know, in the past, the webinars we've had talked about the electric vehicles and the charging stations, the increase in the grid, the electric grid that had to be done. Things to do, talk about the future in terms of electric vehicles. We've had different webinars talking about programs that are going to reduce traffic congestion. This is something that I think is totally unique. People somehow think that flying taxis or drone Ubers or whatever we're going to call them is something so far in the future that we don't have to even start thinking about it. Well, we do have to start thinking about it because it's not so far in the future. And one of the most important parts is if we're going to have this technical device and these complicated flying taxis in our air, that's one part of the program. But these things are going to have to learn how to take off and to land in places that are appropriate and safe. So we're really fortunate today. We have an architectural engineering firm, PS&S, 60 years in business. They've done a great job. They are actually doing the work to try and look for vertical ports. Vertiports, they're called. Places, landing places, takeoff places for these flying taxis. So I'm happy to introduce you our guest today. Our first guest is John Sartor, who is the president of PS&S. It's a multidisciplinary engineering architectural firm. They provide advanced air mobility, real estate, science, technology, education, healthcare, public works, and everything you can think of in terms of making quality of life decisions and quality engineering work. And Mr. Sartor has played a role in developing some of New Jersey's most successful large-scale mixed-use developments. He leads the executive management committee and is responsible for the overall growth and welfare of this fine organization. Our second guest, Chuck Clauser. He serves as a lead for the company's Urban Air Mobility Task Force. His experience is really extensive, but he's worked as a business development staying abreast of the UAM advancement, but as a board member of the American Helicopter Museum and holds memberships in the Vertical Flight Society, Experimental Aircraft Association, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. He serves on NASA's Transformative Vertical Flight Working Groups. So he has an extensive background in he's flown 25 different types of aircraft, on helicopters. He's on 2 single-engine planes. And lastly, he serves as the air boss for 5 consecutive weekend air shows, which if you've never been to an air show, it's tremendous. I was at Atlantic City a couple of years ago in the South Jersey Regional Airport in Bedford, New Jersey. So I want to welcome you both. Thank you for joining us. Our little company, KMM, has found that these webinars are really informative and educational and made it possible to get people as prestigious as you to join us. And we appreciate you. Thank you. So, John, tell us a little bit about PS&S.
Sure. And Phil,
John, before you do, how about if I launch the slide deck? It has some of the information on here, Bill, some of which you've already mentioned, so we can do it very quickly. But if that's okay with you?
There's no formal structure, Chuck. Okay, take it away.
So Chuck, while you're pulling that up, just Bill and KMM, thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk today. Is the sound good, by the way, Bill? Just want to make sure it's okay.
Maybe a little bit up, just a little.
A little bit up? All right.
But Bill or Lynn, you have to give us the permission to share the screen.
So again, thank you so much. Hopefully that's better, Bill. We appreciate the opportunity to talk. You know, we've been in New Jersey. We were founded in New Jersey in 1962, and we've been doing business here ever since. So this is, I grew up nearby. I'm a Union County guy, but very familiar with Middlesex. And we've done a lot of business in Middlesex County, some phenomenal projects. So it's something that's near and dear to our heart is in terms of just the future of our communities. And these communities, there's so much opportunity that has not been there in the past because of technology and the advancements of technology. And specifically, you know, as we talk about air mobility, there's some incredible opportunities here to I guess operate a different way than we ever have before. And for us as a company, you know, my interest in this started in 2018. I'm sorry, there we go, Chuck. So just a couple of things. So you can see our regional office presence. We have offices throughout New Jersey, New York, Eastern Pennsylvania. Again, you mentioned before, Bill, we are a multidiscipline architecture, engineering, land development, environmental survey firm. Close to 300 employees, predominantly here in the Northeast region. We are expanding out of this region. Part of our interest in expansion is really supporting this air mobility initiative. We have a diverse clientele, as it's noted there, public and private sector. And so we have a unique opportunity to understand the needs of the public sector and what they do, especially as it relates to transportation and movement of people, and then marrying that with the development community. You know, it's a real interest to us to see where can we create the best marriage so that we can bring things along and help projects move forward. So we have architecture, engineering, as you can see on the screen here, all different disciplines. One thing on the right, there's energy services. We're very focused on sustainability and the technology we're talking about in terms of carbon footprint reduction, in terms of sustainability, could be a real movement towards that. And so that's, again, another big area of interest for us. Check next slide real quick. These are the sectors we service. I mentioned that to you before. And so the educational sector, where that's Montclair State University there in the picture. We've done a lot of different work throughout New Jersey, New York, in the higher ed. We also do a lot of K through 12, a lot of elementary schools and that type of thing. The energy utility sector is very close to us. Again, renewable energy being a key factor there. Healthcare, helping our healthcare community expand and continue to service the needs of these communities. Hospitality, we've done a lot of work, specifically in Atlantic City and the gaming down there, which again, as you'll hear from Chuck, tremendous opportunity for piloting of this air mobility. I mentioned public sector and real estate, and the nexus of those two is always an interesting area for us. Something else that we do a lot of is science technology. And so this urban air mobility, which has become a new movement for us, it's a new sector over the last couple of years. It's very closely tied with our technology work that we do. But we also do a lot of pharmaceutical, food and beverage type work, which again in New Jersey is still a tremendous opportunity for the state of New Jersey to benefit. So back to the 2018. So 2018, 2019, we really started looking very closely at the urban air mobility movement. Gentleman Ted Osborne, you'll see in a picture there, Chuck Clauser and Jen Ganley. They've been very important to us in terms of helping to expand our knowledge base here. But Chuck took a lead role for us in terms of moving this initiative forward. He had a very interesting background. As you heard, his own personal experience in terms of flight really made him a perfect candidate to marry that with the architecture. Perfect candidate for us to spearhead this air mobility initiative. When I first heard of it, I honestly was skeptical. I really wasn't sure how real it could be. Bill, you said earlier how soon it could be. Is this something we're talking about in the 2030 timeframe? And I attended a conference down in DC, and that really changed my mindset. There was a lot of high-level discussion about the needs of our communities in terms of mobility. How do we move people? Which I know is KMM, that's a real focus for you. So how do we move people? Do we need to continue to grow our existing infrastructure? Do we have, we have tremendous, especially in this region, tremendous needs and demands to maintain the infrastructure we have in place, whether it be roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, helipads, etc. Then you look at the aspects that you see here on the screen. Congestion, big issue for us in this area. Pollution, major focus of climate change, not just here in New Jersey, but worldwide and globally. What can we do to improve that in terms of how we move people? Quality of life and stress, to me, all go hand in hand. Spending an hour and a half a day commuting, can we help reduce that? In turn, can we help reduce that stress? Traffic and congestion go hand in hand, unfortunately. Can we continue to tax our roadway systems, or is there another means to do that differently? And then noise. Traffic brings noise, air can bring noise, etc. So when I went to this conference, these issues were all discussed. And what was discussed is the potential to bring in a new form of transportation that, again, it seemed a little futuristic at the time. But when I heard from major agencies like the FAA, and I heard from NASA, and they were committed to trying to make this work, it really started to change my own thought process about the timing. When they started to commit to deadlines on this, to have regulations in place, to have a program in place to qualify the vehicles themselves and make sure that they're certified properly by some standards. And those deadlines were not, again, the 2030 timeframe. These were 2020. You started looking at that, you said, okay, that's not that far out, and 3 years later, it's even closer. And again, I'm going to defer to Chuck on a lot more of the detailed side, but when you start to really peel back the onion on this and you look at all the benefits, the potential benefits from this urban air mobility movement in terms of simplifying the means of transportation, providing a cleaner means of transportation, potentially safer means of transportation, all of these types of things, this whole discussion, the fact that it's more near term, the fact that it's really could improve our environment, the fact that it could change our investment profile in terms of what we need to do here as a society in terms of reinvesting in our infrastructure year over year versus potentially a new means and a new form of transportation. It gets exciting. It gets really exciting. And I mentioned earlier, Bill, the idea, and I know you've worked personally on a lot of the TOD side, but the idea of creating potentially new forms of transit-oriented development projects around these vertiports. And again, Chuck, I'm going to turn it over to you in a second. But the idea of potentially communities that may not have ever benefited, they may not have had the access, or they have the access to the infrastructure, but they just can't do more. This could create a whole new opportunity for certain towns, certain cities, not just here in New Jersey, but this is globally. And it's very exciting. It's very exciting. So with that, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to Chuck, let him go through more detail here about what we've been doing, some of the exciting projects we've worked on. And I look forward to, if there's any questions that come up, hopefully fielding some of those for you. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you, John. But before I introduce, go back over to Chuck, I just want to add one additional thing to your concepts of the positive is the increased productivity, economic development. I mean, we talk about cost and things, but the time lost in traffic congestion is also a major factor in terms of how people and things move. Freight movement, people movement are all very much involved in productivity, and this type of thing is also could be part of that picture.
Absolutely, Bill. That's an excellent point. And if you could think about it, if you could take that 60-minute stressful commute and cut it to 20 minutes, if you can take that whatever distribution you have and you can cut that down by a fraction, you can increase that capacity. You can, whether that be brain capacity, whether that gives you more opportunity, whether it be with the family, whatever it happens to be, there's so much more value potentially that you're taking. So excellent point, Bill. Thank you.
Well, that's why the investments are so important. Chuck, the logistics of this are kind of mind-boggling in so many ways, but I think John summed up some of the reasons that it makes a lot of sense. So technically, give us a lot of the information there.
Yep, totally agree. And I think, John, thank you for that introduction. It provided a really strong background and structure, really, to this aspect of transportation, this air mobility, which now is cutting across a variety of different sectors. And what we'll talk about that as we go through this, it really has become more than passenger transport. Bill, you alluded to other aspects of commerce, and there are other use cases, as we call them, as well, that we'll get into very briefly. But again, I just want to go through these rather quickly, just to provide some examples of some of the things that we've been involved in. What you see here are just internal studies that we did to explore, the potential, their ideas of where potential may exist, how we can integrate these new vertiport facilities into our urban structure. What you see here is an actual project. Uber Elevate, when they were still in business, they sold in late 2020 to an aviation company called Joby Aviation of California. But back when Uber was alive and well, they commissioned us to develop a vertiport in downtown Los Angeles, which was the first of 3 that they had envisioned, one in LA, one in Dallas-Fort Worth, and one in Melbourne, Australia. And so this is a real building, a 15-story parking garage in LA. We sent a team out there, did a structural analysis of the building, looked over its utilities, its ground plan, what the traffic looked like, how the vehicles that used various parts of this building, is really a multi-use building, how that worked. There was an existing heliport on this already that we were obliged to keep. And from all of that, we developed as much as we could. This is about 64,000 square feet that you see here in these couple of views of this concept, where you see the primary landing spot and then 4 parking spaces and recharging spaces for the what's called eVTOL, Electric Vertical Takeoff and Landing, or eVTOL aircraft. It's kind of a mouthful. It's a little clumsy. Folks are kind of settling on air taxis. But as we'll describe, I think these eVTOLs, as they're known, are going to show us that there's much more potential in addition to what it can do for traffic. We're also working with a company in Colombia, Latin America, the Veyron Corporation, and we developed some prototypes for vertiport facilities here in various instances, one waterside, one in suburbia, and one in the urban context, as food for thought for Veyron as they develop their ecosystem there. Bill and John has already mentioned, some of our memberships, some of our engagements across industry, members of NASA committees and the American Helicopter Museum. We've done a previous podcast with a group called eVTOL Insights from London, and I thought that was very, very well handled. It's a great resource for your listeners to go in and get a lot more perspective and overview of what's happening in the air mobility world as well. And we've made other contacts and partnerships as well along the way that have become very, very important. And very, very quickly, these are some of the touch points that we see looking at what air mobility will be bringing. We're going to be watching for the maturation of both aircraft and the systems that they're going to be operating in. The regulations, certifications are being studied by the FAA and industry being organizations like the National Fire Protection Agency, for example. The development of vertiport design standards, which the FAA is working on, and it'll be a couple years before they are actually promulgated out to all of us, but they are being studied right now. In the meantime, we're using the pre-existing helicopter regulations, which provide some basis for some of our thinking and planning. Air traffic control is going to be a rather different animal. Right now, the National Airspace System, or NAS as we call it, is a highly refined and the world's best air traffic control system. Works very, very well, is very, very safe, and covers a multitude of conditions. It's going to be different when these eVTOLs start operation. The National Airspace System will not be required to participate or provide air traffic control separation services as they do now, but there will be urban air mobility air traffic control service providers, independent firms that have been authorized by the government to provide air traffic separation and planning and traffic control in its routing. And the big question, of course, is both the extension of high energy electric to some of these vertiports. Not all are going to require the massive amounts of electrical sources that the hub facilities are going to require, but we do have to consider that in all parts of the hub and spoke networks, or the mesh networks, if you will, that are being planned. Additionally, public acceptance probably should have been number one. I think it's a very, very important aspect of any transportation system. We're talking about moving transportation into the air, low altitude, short duration enterprises. And I think how the public perceives this will be very, very dependent upon how the government and industry reports to the public. I don't think that we can have public acceptance without public assurance first. Local zoning needs to be brought up to speed. Bill, you already touched upon that. It's very, very important. And state departments of transportation are part of this entire effort. Safety, security, and what we call 10 to the minus 9 reliability is what the airlines enjoy right now in terms of their millions of passenger miles flown every year with perfect safety. Industry support is gathering. It is a phenomenal worldwide energy that has risen and responded to the notion of how air mobility will actually be promulgated throughout not only the nation, but all the countries of the world. Everybody is starting it. It's a global phenomenon. And first, second, and third world countries are looking at this very, very, very carefully. We're also going to be talking about how air mobility actually is more pervasive across a variety of different missions or use cases, as we would call it. I just wanted to put something in here very quickly because folks are going to and are comparing existing helicopters and the perceptions and the way that we see and hear and use a helicopter community right now against what the projections are for the eVTOLs themselves. I think we're all very, very familiar with what the helicopters can do, carry high payloads, they're very, very powerful. They are largely a vertical takeoff and landing. They provide an enormous amount of roles in society and government and military. They do come with high noise profiles, however. They all use carbon-based fuels, whether it's gasoline, diesel, or jet fuel in their turbine-powered aircraft. Helicopters are unique in the way that they are designed and fly. And the physics of helicopter flying is very, very complicated. There are some inherent hazards that the pilots are trained to avoid and mitigate, and they can be expensive to operate for a number of reasons. On the other hand, eVTOLs are distributed electric propulsion. If you think of current drones, small drones that you can buy, they are multi-propeller driven electric motors, and that's the distributed part of the electric propulsion. They produce zero carbon, so the emissions are there. The vertical takeoff and landing is part of their profile, and the roles that they can provide are really going to be based on the aircraft sizes. Right now, aircraft sizes, I think, are rather small. Think of general aviation aircraft, 4 or 5, 6-seat aircraft with limited loads and range. And these aircraft are being developed like that, not because of any other reason other than the battery capability and the range that's available there. The operational systems, I think, are going to be complex. NASA, the FAA, and all of the industry providers, some of which I touched upon, are working very, very carefully. I won't say feverishly. I think carefully is probably the better word in starting to develop how these various systems are going to work, how they are actually going to integrate in the national airspace system, in our communities, in our airspace, in the neighborhoods, and be supportive to the communities as well. So they will have low payloads initially. Their range is limited, as I mentioned, and they do require high energy recharging. That is a quick overview. As John had mentioned, this will happen sooner than you think. And with that brief overview, I think it probably will serve Bill and Lynn as a basis for the discussion, comments, questions that you may have. So back to you, sir.
Well, my first comment, I guess, is these are pilotless. That's what makes it a little bit more difficult, I think, for people to, the public to accept it. Am I right there? I mean, they are pilotless drones.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Bill. That's a very important thing. Folks that are the designers and the operators of these aircraft have their eye very much on the autonomous side of the use of the aircraft. That is a bit out there first. These aircraft will not be launched autonomously. I know that drones are, to different matter. Drones are not carrying people. And I think that is the distinction. These initial launches of these air mobility enterprises will be piloted.
Okay.
We gain experience and build out the system, let it mature, and go from a crawl to a walk to a run environment. So autonomous is in the radar. I think it is several years off. This industry has to first prove itself, and the data needs to be collected to show its reliability and safety and its security.
Yeah. I think, Chuck, is it fair to say the technology that's being developed, it's similar to the aircraft, right? Where there's a certain amount of autonomy built into the logistics of it and how it operates. But I think the perception and the optics of it, Bill, people are going to look for a pilot to be in that seat. Yeah, I think that's the initial in the early stages, like Chuck said, until this is proven and they can get to that 10⁻⁹, mentality. I think you're going to see pilots in there.
Well, I think that's the point I was actually going to try and make. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the 707 and 737s and everything else are a lot of autonomous capabilities, but you still want somebody in there. And we know that even the autonomous vehicle for personal use is something that scares people. They don't have a steering wheel to hold on to. What are they going to do? So I think what Chuck said about baby steps, first step, second step, and public acceptance is going to take a little time. But
Yeah,
I mean,
Bill, I'm sorry.
hard.
I just want to correct a couple of things, not correct, but maybe adjust the narrative a little bit. Autonomy is really not the word that is in existence right now. It's a future capability. I think automated systems is probably the correct term.
Yeah.
And there is a great deal of automated systems that are in our aircraft today, not only commercial, but also business level and even general aviation. The level of not autonomy, which is pilotless, but
Right.
automated, which is piloted, assisted with equipment that we call CNSI, which is communication, navigation, surveillance, and information. Those systems are with us today. They are phenomenal and can take us from immediately after takeoff to just before touchdown with a great deal of automated features. So they are there, they are coming, they are becoming even stronger. I think a big part of this is going to be real world weather gathering and dissemination, which will take it leagues beyond the weather reporting capability that aviation has at the moment. So there is a vast amount of software that is being developed to assist that, such that with the launch and the maturation of these air mobility systems through increased automation, that eventually the autonomy will emerge.
Well, I think one of the things we're also thinking about when we think about autonomous, I'm sorry to say the word, when we think about the self-driving cars, people somehow think that means they're going to be sitting back reading a book and driving down the turnpike, which might be the case in something. But I think the real growth of these industries are going to be in the ride-sharing part. I think the fleets and the actual vehicles on the road are going to be ride-shared. And I think that these autonomous type vehicles or these automated vehicles here that can be driven will actually have somebody piloting more than one person at a time, which I think will be the economic value to it.
And there's a variety of ways to look at that too. Some folks are thinking about remote piloted vehicles, which means that the pilot, and the military is doing this every day, where their aircraft are piloted remotely by a fully qualified pilot on the ground at specialized controls, but doing it remotely, and the aircraft is responding to that pilot's inputs and keeping an eye on the progress of the flight, whatever it might be. Those are kind of probably middle stage or middle phase efforts. And if I may also mention that a lot of folks are very concerned about the notion projecting ahead that there will be, self-driving flying cars. And I would simply say to those listening that if folks are willing to get their pilot's licenses, which I think the FAA is going to require, then that may indeed open the door to any of us piloting an electric aircraft. In fact, you could do it right now. There's a company in Slovenia, Pipistrel, that has been making electric aircraft for over 10 years. They're certified to fly in Europe, and the FAA, I believe, has just authorized training flights in their all-electric aircraft. So all of these prospects are becoming very, very real. There's a great deal of energy and money, quite frankly, behind the development of these various systems. And Bill, one of the first things that you said, that this is enormously complex. There's a lot of moving parts to this. We touched on some of them, in the slide here, the slides, and we're working on that. One of the things that PS&S is very, very much looking to and involved in is that we really insist on knowing and understanding all of the facets that we can, facets that we can, that affect urban mobility, so that when we design our vertiport facilities and advise our clients on potential route structures and other elements that come into this, as well as zoning and adherence and compliance to regulations and so on, we want to know as much as possible. We're trying very, very hard to keep pace with the gigantic volume and waves of information that is sweeping the planet right now. And it is terribly exciting times. We're on our way, all of us, to help bring these initiatives together. And I think the potentials, and may I speak for a minute beyond not only on-demand ride sharing in the air, which are these air taxis, which is the original Uber concept, but also scheduled service, which is more of airline service, Part 135 operators, which is an FAA category of passenger flights, but also would include light freight, which ties right into our ground-based commerce, giving relief to some of the difficulties with ground-based commerce travel and trucking, and assist that and augment it, really. But in addition to that, there are also other aspects as well that would play a very, very good role with these eVTOLs. Things like observation, inspection, news, patrolling, first responders, police observation, EMS, medical services, scientific, educational, the list goes on. And that is what created the category called advanced air mobility. And these are terms that have come to us from NASA. And NASA is very, very, very deeply involved in the creation and the study of every aspect of this air mobility system, so that it works and with the air traffic control system that we have in place today, as well as with safety and understanding the characteristics, because after all, there are over 500 different aircraft manufacturers in one stage of development or another worldwide. Right now, there's probably, depending on the source that you want to look at, anywhere from 12 to maybe 18 front-running aircraft manufacturers that are very highly developed, very well funded, very far along in their engineering and systems structures. So an awful lot of work is moving along very, very well, with a great deal of energy behind it. But advanced air mobility is the term that brings in how electric and even hybrid, I should mention hybrid aircraft as well, for some of the smaller vehicles, has a great relevance, reduced carbon emissions, and maybe perhaps even longer range profiles in terms of distance and perhaps even speed. And certainly in the useful load capability of aircraft, that would be how much can it carry? So those are other elements of it besides passenger. The net result is that there appears to be, all the studies that have taken place and all the examinations that folks both in the industry and outside the industry have made in looking at air mobility overall, is the conclusion is that there's huge potential for society, for the way that we work, for the way that we live, for the way that we move about, which is relevant to what you folks do, Bill and Lynn. And as a result of this, there's such tremendous potential that is being pursued with a great vigor, shall we say.
Well, I think even on a basic level right now, I know I read about the transplanted organs going to the hospitals on a drone. I mean, that's a simple thing to start with the light freight you're talking about, but think about how much faster you can move an organ for transplant to a hospital to help save someone's life. That kind of medical stuff is already there. And that's just the beginning of this future you're talking about, Chuck. I do know also, you brought up something that I was going to ask about, the supply chain issues that we're facing. Supply chain right now is showing where the cogs in the wheel are, where we have our traffic issues. in Middlesex County here, we have a serious issue about trucks going from the port to our warehouse logistics district. All the negatives that John was talking about in terms of air pollution and traffic congestion and neighborhood quality of life is all being impacted by this type of freight movement. So there's the future that you're talking about, I think makes a whole lot of sense. I think that's the kind of thing we'd think that once we can open up the planet to better ways of doing things, and certainly less pollution and cleaner and more environmentally friendly, sustainable ways, we're doing the future, much brighter future for all of us. And I think
Totally agree, Bill. And the other thing too is let's not discount the benefits that are out there as well. This is a true new industry. It's not simply the adaptation of aircraft into a kind of people moving or commerce or other type of mode. It is really a new industry using new vehicles with new technologies that everybody recognizes, of course. But when you examine it, what the net result is that there has to be, there's just no other solution other than this will engender job creation across the board with industries that need to supply and support the eVTOL industry and everything that is associated with it: hardware, software, engineering, parts, supplies, training, and everything that goes along with developing an enterprise like this. So the benefits just in terms of job creation itself are monumental, and I think very, very encouraging right now. Yes, you know, the country and the world, I think, is seeing a walk back in what's happening with the ability to deliver goods and services since the year's interruption or more by COVID, where so many things have been cut back and now have to revamp and reorganize and refigure out how to return to previous levels. The things that have been returning to previous levels are carbon emissions. So I think that is a timely conversation with what has happened recently in terms of world leadership looking very, very carefully at this. This has a potential to do it. I should also mention that I saw a recent study where aviation emissions total from all of our aircraft on an annual basis represents about 4.2% of total worldwide emissions. Now, that's not a very large amount. Nevertheless, it is widespread throughout the globe. Aviation, followed, I guess, by ground traffic. But there's absolutely every reason that we should be doing our part with this. And even hybrid power plants are a step in the right direction because of the reduced emissions, and actually can act very, very well as a stepping stone towards a total electric. But the great emphasis, of course, is in total electric. That means we have to have conversations with our electric grid suppliers, talk about energy usage, conservation, sustainability, and the total increase as we begin to work with so-called smart cities and how they are working with with their communities in providing better, more connected services between government services and the citizens and the users of services as well. So there are many parts attached to this. It's in a way like holding onto an octopus with each hand. Those tentacles are out there, and each of those has a commodity attached to it. That's why we are attempting to understand and work with all of the various facets that we have just begun to talk about with air mobility. Tremendous promise. There's a great deal of work to do. We have rolled our sleeves up within PS&S in a variety of ways. And we are terribly excited about the future and the potential of the development of this and its benefit to society. And that's really where this needs to come in and land, is can we quantify the benefits to society?
Right. Well, we had a webinar in the past a couple months ago about if there's 30,000 electric vehicles now, or single occupant vehicles driving in New Jersey, and the goal is 300,000. The grid work has to be upgraded considerably. And when I look at the charging, you're just not talking about a landing spot, a takeoff spot. You're going to have charging stations, charging ports at these locations, which are all part of a grid type of. You're right, the multifaceted part of it. I think you've really presented a really great, clear vision of how these things can work, not only logistically, but why they should work. And I think that's the important question, why it's not just somebody's pie in the sky dream that you talk about. It's actually something that's going to pay off benefits beyond what we even think about right now. Our future that we're looking at, I don't think the Wright brothers ever quite understood what was going to happen when they crashed into the sand in North Carolina. And this is where we are right now. We're beyond Wright brothers in a whole lot of different ways, and the technology coming about. I'll briefly say I was on a cruise ship where we're up to the captain's deck up there, and they control these huge, gigantic cruise ships with a joystick. Okay, there's no big wheel anymore. These type of things are happening. They use electric motors on the cruise ships. So things are happening every single day, and people like you are going to be leading the charge in how we do these type of things. I think our time is pretty much up here, but do we have any questions, Len? Len, you're muted. So, this muting device is really good. I kind of have a lot of uses for this muting device. My wife says I don't have a hearing problem. I have a listening problem, okay?
We do not have any questions at this time, but if anyone has any that they want to send later on, send it to programs@amm.org and we'll forward them along.
Well, I just want to, then I will wrap it up by saying, Chuck and John, you guys are really tremendous at what you're doing. Beyond just the vertiports, the other type of work that you're looking at, sustainability, the transit-oriented developments type of programs, are the future that we have to look at in America and in the world if we're going to keep this planet alive. And all the types of things you're working on is really great, and your experience is going to make it the transition a whole lot easier for all of us. So I want to thank you. If you have any last words you want to say, I'll let you go. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Thank you.
No, just Bill and Bill, KMM, Lynn, thank you guys so much for the opportunity. Again, you can tell we're very excited about this topic. It is an exciting space, and as Chuck said, it's new, and I think if we can come together and recognize the benefits relative to carbon footprint, noise reduction, there's so many tremendous aspects of this that can improve our communities. I think it's important that if everyone comes together and embrace it and don't think it's too futuristic, it'll happen soon. So thanks again.
As a